Right. Well, thank you everybody for coming to our talk. Uh, my name is Herb Winters. I'm the district manager for the Gillum SWCD. We're giving a presentation about process to persistence with Roger Lathrop, who's our project manager at the SWCD, and Reese Mercers with the Western Beavers Cooperative. So we'll just go ahead and dive in and run through some things. So this talk kind of came together after some previous presentations that were done at Connect in 2024. Our conservation district did a little talk on the process-based restoration that we're doing in the 30-mile watershed and kind of giving folks an update of what we're learning there. And then last year, Reese gave a presentation on beaver strongholds and her work prioritizing beaver-based restoration planning at scale. And so then we kind of got to talking after those presentations, Reese and Roger and I, and decided that maybe we should work together. And so with that, we went out and got an OCRF grant from ODF&W and started working with Reese, and she's going to tell you all the cool details here in a minute. But just rocking through kind of our talk, I'm just going to give a quick intro here, and then Roger's going to talk about background, kind of the system response that we've seen with our work to date, and then Reese is going to show off some really cool stuff that she's working on. We'll wrap things up. So just to put you guys in our place, we'll be talking about 30-mile in the John Day Basin. So the John Day Basin there in the purple. We have the 30-mile watershed in the red polygon there, 270 square miles, 116 stream miles. This is a mid-Columbia steelhead fishery that we're working on, 12-digit hucks. This is all private land, so everything that we do, we need to get permission from our landowners. It's a huge part of our work. And also we only have 3 people on our staff, so we don't have a lot of capacity. And that's why we needed Reese to help us out with some of this stuff. So just kind of building the vision. So like we have been really, drink the process-based restoration Kool-Aid and just going after it. We have lots and lots of that stuff going on, and we've been learning a lot, trying to figure out, how's it working. And this kind of started with Roger and I years ago in Bridge Creek, the work that was done there, kind of initially in Oregon with process-based restoration and the BDAs and the PALs that were there. And that's kind of why we've really jumped into it. We saw the results there, and we wanted to replicate it in our watersheds. And I think we've done a good job there, really getting our producers to bite on this. And a huge part of that comes from Roger, his day-to-day work, building trust with our landowners. And so Reese is going to talk about surveying over 80 miles of stream on private land. That's a kind of a unicorn scenario, I think, in Eastern Oregon. And so it was great to have that opportunity. With that, is this community that we're building with our landowners. We just kind of did our first 30-mile landowner appreciation meeting dinner this year, and I think we're going to keep doing them like every 2 years. Have all our partners come in and talk about all the science so they can learn about what's happening on the property, which is super valuable, and I think will help them, be proud of this voluntary restoration work that they're doing, and keep telling their story that they do want to improve their property, and they're doing all these really great things. And ultimately, they're letting us experiment on their property. Like we're trying these techniques, and we're not entirely sure how it's going to work, and that takes a lot of trust. And so we're very grateful for that. But again, like all this depends on them saying yes or no, and that's this guy over here. He's just hands down the best guy to do it, I think, in Oregon. So our planning challenge, right? So we've been doing like all this work on our streams, and um, you know, this I'm just going to tell a short story, and then I'll let these folks take it. But like for us, like with our BDAs, we did our first project was in 2020, and half of the project is an old CREP project that was really successful, 20 years plus of the trees growing. and the other half not so much. There wasn't a lot of vegetation there, and no one was really surprised to see that the beavers showed up in the vegetated spot first, right? Okay. But then it got us thinking like, oh my gosh, we have so many miles of stream that is not ready for beavers. And we wanted to be really strategic about how we put our funds on the ground and where to start, where to kind of maybe overlook and go somewhere else. Just prioritize our work over time, and that's what Reese is helping us do. So we wanted to do an inventory of like where are the beavers, what are the conditions that'll support their long-term, commitment as far as colonizing, and then where maybe additional investments might be premature. So, anyways, just getting a lay of the land. Um, so again, like we're doing these assessments over and over again. Like it might seem it's like a layered cake, right? Like you have like old planning documents, like the mid-sea recovery plan for Steelhead. You have the watershed assessments that were funded by OWEB. We have all these other technical assistance kind of, we did a big LiDAR prioritization. And like to me, this is like another layer just on top of that to help us with our work on a whole watershed. And so again, Reese will get into this, but she's going to help us develop an action plan. My goal is to basically have a roadmap of like each reach we want to hit it this year, that year, the next. This is how much it's going to cost. And really, then we can also show our landowners, not only our funders, but our landowners that we have a plan too. And one thing we have to make the case for is like this stuff doesn't happen overnight. This takes a long time. We've ran into that with some of our producers where like we thought this was going to be great in like 2 years. I was like, no, this is going to take a long time. And just trust us, and we're going to be in it with you like the whole time. Like we're all rooting for the whole process to work. So I think that's pretty much it. I'll let Roger talk about really cool history stuff. So.
Thanks, Herb. Little background, the 30-mile watershed in north central Oregon, very rough, rugged. It's most of it's around a 12-inch precip zone. Um, it the common land historical land uses were primarily grazing, intense grazing, and then a lot of conventional tillage in the uplands. Um, a little timeline there again, heavy grazing in the uplands and down on the valley bottoms. Very intense cultivation on top. Um, heavy beaver trapping. And then there was kind of a flood in 1964, which drastically changed the systems altogether. So moving into restoration work, that really started in 1986 with the CRP program, um, where they basically converted approximately 75% of the crop ground on top to permanent grass. Probably one of the most important conservation benefits we've seen in that area. It not only stabilized the uplands, but it really stabilized our creek systems. Prior to CRP, fencing, planting, it wouldn't work because those systems flooded every single year. So then around 2001 to 2003 in main stem 30-mile, there was several CREP projects went in, approximately 5 miles of creek and upper 30-mile, 5 different landowners. And that kind of was the first in-stream restoration that was done. When I started with the district in around 2008, I noticed that there hadn't been much work done on main stem 30-mile. And so I prioritized working on 30-mile, primarily with just excluding cattle off the stream. A big challenge I had was that most of the landowners that weren't already participating in CREP were actively involved in CRP, and they were up against that threshold of payment limitations with USDA. So most of them were eligible for CREP, but they were large ownerships, so we could only enroll, little short segments at a time. So I pursued additional funding, working with ODF&W fencing program, they partnered with OWEB, BPA funding, and between 2012 and 2014, we fenced off 16.5 miles of 30 Mile Creek. Um, and then we just recently, between 2020 and 2025, we have installed 12 miles of low-tech process-based restoration on main stem 30 Mile. So to date, in the 30 Mile watershed, we have 70 miles of stream protected, either in CREP or just with riparian fencing. Um, and 75% of the historical cropland is now in CRP. The remaining 25% is no longer conventionally tilled. All that cropland is now using modern farming methods, leaving plenty of residue on the ground. So that those changes happened over decades and they didn't come from one action. Again, CRP was an enormous benefit. I remember when I first started my career working with the ODF and W biologist, he told me that, CREP is a really good tool for restoring fish habitat, but it doesn't hold a candle to what CRP did. So that was extremely important. Um, and the beaver forage is just starting to come back with that riparian protection in place. A lot of those projects were just fencing off the stream and not necessarily doing a lot of planting. So where we've been, some of the work that we've done, fencing, planting, you can see down here, that was one of those first, actually this one down here is a different site. That was just fencing. We did some BDAs. The beavers came in and went to work behind it. This is the bottom right there is one of the first scrap projects we did in the county, where the landowner worked really hard to get that established, packing buckets down to the creek and watering the trees a couple days or every other week in the summertime. The low-tech process-based restoration, all of that work went into areas that had already been fenced. We've done 12 miles. We have 14 and a half miles designed, 10 miles in the works for being designed, and some work in front of us this summer. So on this slide with the process-based restoration, in the blue there in the middle, that's the Sniption Reach. We did that in 2022. The Wilson Smith Reach we did in 2020. That was our first project. We did a phase 2 on that in 2024. And Upper 30 Mile, which is a 6-mile reach, we did in 2022. And we have designs to do a phase 2 implementation on that. So what have we learned? We've learned where we've done work, the beavers have showed up. Pretty much everywhere we've done, whether it's fencing and planting or sometimes just fencing, the beavers have shown up and went to work. Most of these slides are in some of those early CREP projects where we've done BDAs. So here is a slide of a fencing project that I did in 2014. We did not plant this. And the vegetation response was amazing. And it just so happens to be one of the most active beaver sites that we have now. Here's another one. That was just a fencing project. Again, the vegetation response was really, really good. And here's another one where we've actually done fencing, planting, and BDAs. And we have beaver activity in that site as well. So what we've learned, again, we've learned that where we have done work, the beavers have showed up. It seems like for the past 20 or 30 years, we've kind of been chasing the beavers. And I think with what Herb mentioned, our goal now is rather than chasing the beavers, we want to get out in front of them and pave the way for them with all the work that we've done. The one thing I will add to a tool, a really handy tool that we have in our toolbox now is that 30 years ago, beaver acceptance, it was not tolerated. So if we were talking 30 years about expanding beaver habitat, we wouldn't be able to work with any private landowner. Currently, we've got about probably 95% of the landowners in the 30-mile watershed that are begging us to get beavers on their property. And so that's where we brought Reese in to try to get ahead of them, quit chasing them, and let's get in front of them.
Thank you, Roger.
Sorry.
And Herb. Thank you for overviewing that. I'm really excited about this project. It is a little bit of a unicorn, but to have an agency that gets it and is thinking really strategically at scale, how beavers can come back on the land has been really exciting for me to be able to have this opportunity. So thanks to Herb and Roger for their support and for all of the work that you've been doing already to enhance the land and prepare the land for beavers when they arrive. So as Roger shared, 30-Mile Creek beavers are returning to the system and really in a very exciting way. These beavers, these 30-Mile Creek beavers, they come from a lineage that survived the system for millions of years. And they've gotten through the Hudson's Bay Company attempting to extirpate them. Super high flows coming into this system, these beavers have survived, and stream straightening and a lot of unnatural pressures, including more trapping, have all come into this system. And so the beavers that are coming in now really are legacy. It's built into their DNA, what this system is like, and they're just returning to the waters that they originally came from with their lineage. So now we want them here, as Roger said. And I like this slide because as stream restoration practitioners, we think a lot about what our needs are for having beavers on the landscape, but I think it's important to really start thinking from the pond view of what the beavers' needs are. And their needs are simply family building and individual fitness and the capacity to reproduce and pass on their genes. That's it. That's all they care about. So how can we help them along the way? And of course, our goal really with all of this, and it's written into the state action plan, is for occupancy persistence. So we want beaver managed floodplains in a lot of these places. So now that we want them here, how do we understand who's in there? And then how can we support their stay and persistence, not only now, but also for future generations? And then how can we expand when they are persistent and they're successful in place, like 30-mile beavers are becoming better and better at? How can we actually support what their future expansion might look like within the system? So this roughly maps the area of under, what do you call an area of interest that we looked at, that Herb had mentioned earlier. That's what we want. These are the areas that we want to understand. And these are the areas, actually, let me back this up. These are the areas within the system that are identified in green as having the right geomorphic potential and hydrologic potential that could conceivably support beavers. So pretty much throughout the system, we know that there was probably beaver occupancy on this landscape. They probably helped shape this land 200 years ago before they were extirpated. So when we think about a return of beavers and understanding their occupancy and endeavoring to have beavers recolonize our watersheds at scale, it's good to think about the math of this and what are the factors that can recolonize the system slowly or maybe step on the gas, because that's what we're looking for here, especially in a time of climate change, drought, and other pressures that are ahead of us. How can we maybe put our foot on the gas to accelerate the beaver recolonization faster? So these are the sort of conditions that we're looking at for the system. And this is considering a low density system where we don't already have beavers at full capacity, which we definitely don't right now in 30-mile. So then we start thinking about what are those interventions that we can do, which Roger and Herb have already put some of these interventions into place. But how can we actually intervene to kind of set the stage for supporting the beavers that are already in place? Again, we're not relocating beavers into the system. We want to work with the beavers we already have that know the system, they know what to eat, they know how to survive. That's our focus area is looking at those strongholds where beavers are already thriving. So getting out into the field, we did this back in November, we spun it up, I think within a week. Roger was incredible getting landowners in place. And we identified that we really had about 85 miles of stream that we wanted to survey. We ended up surveying 83, I think. And so I want to talk about the survey design a little bit because I think that's really important. And particularly, a lot of the survey protocols right now rely on a randomized reach sampling. So there's American Beaver Activity Survey Protocol, all randomized reach. It's largely a monitoring protocol, not an assessment, if you will. BRAT also uses randomized reach sampling. But I want to advocate if you're thinking about doing this work and thinking about how to support beavers and have them recolonize and return either like at a riverscape scale or even at a HUC 12 scale or more, to think about doing contiguous surveys. And that's really where I'm focused is I'm not doing any more random reach samples. You really can't learn about biology by doing randomized reaches. I'll give you an example. This is from another project. 2 HUC 12s are showing here on the slide. And we surveyed about 15 reaches that were provided to us by Utah State. This was a few years ago. And what we missed in these surveys, and I happened to sort of know the system, but got to know it better, is that there were 2 multi-generational sites within the HUC 10 that were basically feeding the whole system, and we entirely missed it in that survey protocol. So now I'm always advocating for those doing a contiguous survey, and the math on doing the contiguous surveys versus doing randomized reaches, it's pretty much the same in terms of cost and effort. So what you miss with those randomized reaches, you only start to see when you're looking at full scale reach. And what we're learning and what we have really started to understand with 30-Mile Creek is that the network is really important. And this network is really how beavers support each other. It's how they survive. It's how they have resilience within the system, not just these individual islands that we might pick up in a random reach or a random survey. So instead of scattered signs, we start to see how beaver families actually occupy the whole watershed, where their territory is anchoring the system, where new settlement is forming, and where dispersers are passing through and testing the system. And so now we start to have a map of generational family territories connected by dispersal. So I like to survey at a HUC 12 scale. I included in here kind of what can be expected if you're in Eastern Oregon versus Western Oregon. You can see on Eastern Oregon, our challenge isn't as complex as on Western Oregon, where you have more streams that are perennial to survey where beavers might exist. So just to emphasize this point one more time, because it's that important, is understanding occupancy at scale is where this work lies. Not following the beavers, not trying to understand where we need to put beavers or where we want to have beavers come to a property, really understanding the broader scale of what's happening within the system now and what kind of activity is happening really at a network scale. So I think about when we have a connected occupancy network like we're having now and we're seeing in 30-Mile Creek, and I'll go into that in a minute, that we start to build resilient systems. We're not isolated in little islands of activity. So on the left side, if we hit disturbance, if we have a big event, those sites are going to fail. On the right side, at some of our occupancy and network clusters, the networks bend, they don't break. Oh, and here's my example of how those sites support each other. It's my little flashing purple arrows. So here's what the data survey form looked like when we went out and collected data. We're using a framework that I've been working on with a few other folks over the last year and a half. Herb and Roger were crazy enough to say, let's try it on 8 12 size reaches. This is our survey form that we adapted for 30-Mile Creek. This is a process that we're really co-creating together and learning from each other and from the watershed itself. So the important data points that we were collecting, and I've left a few out here, but 6 key beaver activity signs, these are the ones that really signal, are they doing something here at this site? So there's a lot of other stuff we can survey, but these are the 6 that we really care about to know if there's a territorial commitment happening within the system and within the reach. Also important is beaver forage availability. My review of habitat potential indicators and also a lot of the survey protocols right now just really fall short on the forage availability. Beavers got to eat, and we've kind of forgotten that over the years as we got really excited about structures. And structures are important, but they're not going to show up on those structures, which we'll see in a minute, if they don't have a food source. And then last, this is something that we developed at the urging of Roger and Herb. Once, we had field crews out there, and we really wanted to understand what their long-term CREP projects or installations, how they were performing. And so what we did is created a rapid assessment for some heuristic vegetation indicators and saw the immediate benefit. We performed that on 55, I think about 14 miles of CREP reaches that had been in place for a couple of decades. And they wanted to know how those reaches were actually doing. So we did that on what's 55 divided by 330, through about 1/6 of the watershed. We did this additional forage indicator. How much browse is there? How much recruitment vigor is there? What's the soil moisture in there? And we liked it so much that we're actually going back through the data and scrubbing it to understand it for the whole data set. And this is something we'll apply moving forward. And then we have this bonus data set. It's a little hard to see right here, but when the BDA preparation was done, some of the LIDAR data was extracted to understand what the height above nearest drainage is. So I think it's the height above the thalwag. What is the area that, and we have it to a 0.5 meter resolution, which is like amazing. If you activated 0.5 meters of stream, or were able to activate that much of the floodplain, what's the potential for soil moisture and recruitment activation and support for planting? So that was awesome to have that. So let's take a closer look at the beaver signs. What we really want to know is not, is there beaver there, presence, absence? We want to start understanding who's in there. Like, do we have new families? Do we have maybe a pair of buck beavers that can live on a 6-pack of beer and bag of Dorito chips? Or do they have more extensive forage needs? And then how are they actually living in that space? And so this is a spectrum that we have developed that came out of 30-Mile, and probably each system kind of has its own patterns that you start to recognize, but we can really start to understand if a site is a population sink where we're losing beavers, or is it actually a population source that is producing kits year after year that's pushing those kits out into the system as dispersers. So as I mentioned earlier, this is what matters to a beaver. They don't care about the structures. They don't care about high flows so much. in some respects, they don't even care about gradient of stream. If there's food there, they're going to show up. But the amount of success and persistence at that site may fall on this scale somewhere. So yeah, family building is a biological unit that matters to a beaver, not dams. So getting kind of beyond just counting dams, I think, is where this work needs to lie. So on data collection, we took a closer look at forage availability. I think I've talked about this before in the past. You want to have enough food in there so that when the beavers show up, the amount of regeneration that's taking place, so the pace of food regeneration and recruitment can keep up with their harvest. And beavers have really high forage needs, which I've talked about in the past, and happy to show those needs. But the conventional thought is they need about 3 to 5 acres of forage within a territorial reach. So that's about half of the area that they need to have actually for food availability, the ability to regenerate, and then also cover so that they can harvest safely within the system. Oh, and here's my GIF that will show you kind of the ideal conditions of how a beaver would move through a territorial reach. If it has sufficient forage from day one, that they're able to move within that territorial reach as forage gets limited. So they'll harvest in clustered areas. And then as they exhaust that portion of the reach, they'll actually move the whole family downstream or upstream to harvest new sources within the same territory. So when forage persists, the families persist. When families persist, they raise young. When they raise young, you get dispersal and recolonization. And when dispersal meets landscape capacity, which is what we're working to build, this is really how they recolonize a basin. And this is at a basic level how it works. So forage indicators I mentioned is a new addition to our protocol, and I will use it everywhere we go because this is really what's going to inform our prioritization, like where is the highest level of effort for activating a reach and being able to support a reach, and where is the lowest level of effort where we might have the biggest wins with just a little adjustment of the dial. So this is that bonus data set that I mentioned, height above nearest drainage, which can really tell us at a finer scale what's the topography and what might be that zone of influence if we were to get BDAs in there or do some other kind of work to prepare the site. So key with all of this on our survey crews, I want vegetation ecologists first, and beaver activity you can train. It's easy to recognize beaver activity, but the work for all of this really is in the vegetation, and something that Roger's been doing an amazing job with over time. So that's been something that's really been an advantage for us. So hitting the field with data collection is where we landed next. And I'll walk through these because I realize my time limitations here, but 400-meter reaches, it's kind of nice. It's a quarter of a mile. 2-person crews, we averaged about 2.5 miles a day. This is very rugged terrain, and we relied on a side-by-side when we could. Some of these sites we had to hike out and back, but 2.5 miles a day. This is more territory than we covered on those randomized reaches. Randomized reaches, you're spending more than half your time in a car trying to access the site. So again, another reason to do contiguous surveys. And then the data collected, we already talked about. We averaged on this project about $300 a mile is where it came out. And we had field maps generated for us. It's easy to do this work without creating field maps. It just makes it a little organizer to do this. And then again, another shout out to Roger for all the considerable landowner communications, which went without a hitch. These are our survey crews. I included the photo down below in the bottom right. This is our crew calibrating and understanding how are you looking at this, at the landscape? How are you looking at the landscape? And that was really important for us. Every day we'd check in and calibrate with each other. We'd call out what we were logging on the survey so that we were all kind of on the same page with our observations that we were making. And this is Callan from the Watershed, or from the Soil and Water Conservation District, picking up trail cameras, because I highly recommend, if you have them, to deploy trail cameras. They give you a really good idea of how many beavers you have in your system, and they'll just give you minimums, so they won't necessarily tell you everyone, but you can start to identify individuals within the system. If you have them out there for a period of 2 to 3 weeks, there are ways to really understand how many beavers you have in there, and just kind of ground truth some of what your data collection is finding. So for the data geeks out there, this is the data set, just a quick look at some of the data that we gathered. Those current conditions in this first box here. Do current conditions support long-term persistence? What's the potential? I talked about that, developed from the CREP assessment that we developed. And then what is the current beaver occupancy? So we have a scoring system that relates to an index where we can see, is this a really active site that might have a generational occupancy and maybe 2 years of kits at the site? Or is it a site maybe where they're just kind of getting started and figuring things out and still an immature site? So where we're going and what we have ahead of us is to identify for each of our reaches or a cluster of reaches, what are the big drivers that are, or the big limitations that are preventing beaver persistence at the site, identifying what those limitations are, and then starting to identify what is the highest value of interventions in those restoration pathways that we can pursue. So let's take a really quick look at those current conditions, because this kind of informs our whole framework. We borrowed from the, thank you. We borrowed from the rangelands. They use a state in transition model. So for each of our sites, we've identified whether they are the sites themselves from a geomorphic and hydrologic and forage potential standpoint, whether they are structurally constrained on one end, we're not going to mess with them, they're low priority. Or are they on the other end? Maybe they already can support beaver occupancy, but we don't have beavers in there yet, or we might, depending as the case may be. So this just helps us to organize and kind of categorize all of the data that we've found, and we're relying on this to help inform what our strategic plan might be and our interventions in the future. So some maps, just for those of you who love maps. This is the beaver distribution along 83 miles of stream in 30-Mile Creek. And you can see the blobs, if you will, where the beavers are right now. That shows the existing occupancy. What we also found is that beavers are in fact dispersing throughout this whole system. Where there was food availability, there were signs of beavers, but they weren't always settling in those places. So I think this is really important to understand. They're already in the system. They're just looking for good places to settle in and set up families. So I showed this earlier. This is really the occupancy gradients that we started to identify and think about the network as we're seeing how these sites are getting established within the system. Here's another look at that map. And this is now what we can really start to understand is that network, and where are there clusters or strongholds of families that are feeding this whole system. Once we understand that, we can start thinking about dispersal and how do we actually support the pathways that beavers need when they have those kits and start pushing out in the system. How can we start supporting those dispersal pathways? So I'm really excited about those next steps ahead of us. I want to share another look at the main stem of 30-Mile. So these are all of the interventions that Soil and Water Conservation District have pursued over the last 20 or 30 years. Roger really stepped on the gas in 2008. But these are the areas where the work is being done or has been done, and the areas where beavers are showing up. I don't think there's a single site here that beavers have shown up without interventions. So when you have the food, the beavers are showing up. There are places where there is structure, but there's no beavers. So finding those pathways and what these beavers need to understand has been an important part of all of this. Do you have anything to say on the interventions in place here? Because they were
I don't
extensive.
think so. They were kind of all across the board. Like I mentioned earlier, like, site one, there's beaver activity there. That was just a fence put up. Site 2, 3, 4, and 5 are kind of the same. And then moving up higher, there was a few more interventions with crab adding plantings and BDAs. So at the end of the day, whether it was the fence that increased the vegetation, or it was the prep plantings that increased the vegetation, or even the BDAs, some of the early projects we did, we saw an increase in vegetation. So however we were able to increase that food source, definitely invited the beavers to come.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really exciting to see, like, if you build it, they will come
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
Here's that index I was talking about in terms of the beavers' response and the amount of activity that we were seeing at each of those sites. Thank you, Roger. So if we look at the high scores on cluster 4 and 5, this is the engine of recovery for this system. These sites are where beavers are having young and they're reproducing year after year, and where we're really looking to support future beaver occupancy and dispersal within the system. So here's a close-up, just because I love looking at the symbology of that site. This is a half-mile stretch. This is probably a couple families in here. There are there are, I think, 4 active den sites in here. Lots of dams you can see on the brown spots, lots of foraging areas. This is the area that was riparian fencing only, but it's got a really wide floodplain, and the system's been able to start to regenerate itself. And then when the beavers moved in, how many years ago? 5?
Probably
7 years ago. This is the oldest occupancy site. So yeah, they're probably having kits year after year, and our trail cameras showed that. So stepping back, and I'll wrap up here and hand it back over to her. But I just wanted to take kind of big picture view. So when Roger and Herb are thinking about planning and what we have in the work ahead, we surveyed 83 stream miles. We know 64 of the stream miles have the right geomorphic potential to support long-lasting beaver occupancy. We know that about 52 of the stream miles are actually wetted for most of the year, plus or minus, but like in a normal year, there's water in 52 out of 83 stream miles. And so we know that about 63% of what we surveyed should be able to support beavers. Right now, we have beavers in just under 4 miles of stream. So I think about this difference, this gap here, really as our play space. This is where we have work ahead of us. And as a PS, our beaver occupancy kind of shows this as well, that these are each of the reaches that had beavers. Our trail cameras give us an idea of the minimums of the number of beavers and the ages of those beavers. And we can see that occupancy within the system is on about 3 miles of stream. It happens to be about the same amount of good available forage that we have for beavers on the stream as well. I'll relook at Herb's slide really well. So we are in the assessment stage. We're just wrapping it up as of yesterday in theory. We still got a few more weeks to go on that one. We're building our action plan with a lot of those inputs that I was just looking at, and then we'll be doing implementation and monitoring to see really what's working and what isn't working, and where beavers actually showing up. And by having a contiguous baseline, we can start comparing it year over year, or every other year over every other year. This is an example of where we're going. So for each of those clusters that we want to support that have beaver occupancy right now, you have an idea what the past interventions were and why they came and showed up. We want to start looking 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and even 20 years out, because this is really generational work, like Herb was talking about, This isn't just about supporting future generations of beaver occupancy, but it's supporting future generations of the community, your field technicians, just creating an action plan for these beavers within the whole system. And so this is where we're headed with this kind of work and just the overall project itself. And this is an example of that. So having these state and transition, we call them beaver persistence readiness classifications, we can start tracking how the system is doing with that. And I'm going to flip it back over to you, Herb, for kind of what our learnings have been so far on this. Okay, sure.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks Reese for the awesome talk on this. But like just listening to Reese talk, it just reminds me of like how like in Roger and I's careers, how much things have changed, and how we're constantly learning and doing new techniques and finding new partners to do this great stuff. And this is, like, and to Reese's credit, Thirtymile and surveying Thirtymile usually chews people up and spits them out. It's not fun. It's rugged. It's gnarly. And her team, like, they did great and they accomplished a lot in a very little amount of time. And with that, we have all this information. We are still kind of distilling it and trying to understand it better. But, like Roger said, like we are not going to be chasing the beavers anymore. Like we are, the goal is to set it up for them and they'll find it. So our, a big thing for me, and I'm not following the slide very well, I'm sorry, but a big thing for me is like with our BDA designs, like we have all these objectives in our OWeb applications or whatever application, and we have this like huge laundry list of things that we want these BDAs to accomplish, and we still want to do that, but to me, it's like we have to focus on the vegetation. Like that is just what we have to do. We're getting ahead of ourselves before we do anything else. And so like for us, it was a real gut check. Like, I remember we found a stick that had the beaver chew on it and like our first BDA project. And we were out there and put it above our heads, like, all right, we're done, we're good. And it's like, we're not close to done. We have so much more stuff to do. And so like, that's just part of it. Like, this is just learning through doing and trying things out. And so throughout all this work, like I was talking to Reese earlier today, like our goal is to build a community with our producers, with our partners, with everybody, and like try to see this whole watershed restored. And it's amazing that we are now able to talk about beavers and people are excited about beavers. That's a huge thing. And it's super exciting. And we just have to keep raising the bar with our work, with our assessments and things like this. And this is just one example of it. And I think at the end of the day, we're going to get more work done more efficiently in the right places and for the right reasons. And yeah, feel really fortunate to work where we do and yeah, keep fighting the good fight. This is fun stuff.
Yeah, I
anything
mean,
else, Reese?
just the rugged landscape. We didn't even have any photos of
Yeah.
what a nightmare this place is. And before we went out, I thought, God, if they can get beavers in here, like it makes everything look easy. So of course, Roger and Herb are working in one of the most challenging landscapes that I've been in, and the beavers are showing up. Herb has asked me before, am I crazy? And he probably is a little bit crazy, but I'm like, they're showing up. So you're drinking from the same crazy sauce, if you will. So they're showing up. So how can we support them? Yes.
And I guess I will follow a little bit of the slide, like the last bullet, like I can't say it enough. Like Roger and I are not gonna see the end of this, our work. This is gonna keep going. Like it's gonna be the next generation. Like Callan, our intern, she's graduating from college this year. We're hoping she comes back and works and she can pick up, the torch and keep doing. But this is gonna be a long haul. And we have to be realistic about that. And that's something that, we've had to do with our community. It's been a big one. That this is going to take a long time and a lot of resources, but it's totally worth it. And it's taken some time to get our folks for everybody to get on the same page, but we're there and we're excited. So
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Roger. Oh, we'll just do that. We're okay, Amber, we're done. Thank
yeah.
watershed. You need Beaver. Well, there must be something in it for them, right? So can you describe like what's part of that shit?
I'm gonna let Roger do that one.
That's an easy one,
Yeah.
lack of water. I
Yeah.
mean, they've seen the benefit with those structures holding back more water and they all want more water. So
So it's going to be a really dry year. I expect that to work.
It's not gonna be great. It's just one of those things. It's again, it comes down to just dealing with the climate, right? Like some of our BDAs that we've put in, we had really low flows for like 2 years and nothing really happened. We had to wait for those big flows, sustained flows for a long time to really shake the system up. And so we're just going to deal with drought. It's one of those things. We hope that our critters, make it, and that we just keep working towards building more and more habitat for them over time. So, like as Reese says, building and expanding on our strongholds, so that even in those low water years, that they can make it. So it's just we have to do our best.
And I'll just add to that, beavers aren't fish, and I have to remind myself of that all the time in a good way. Beavers can hunker down. When it comes to beavers, I don't know how your steelhead feel about this, but beavers can make it through, and that these are beavers that have survived dry years before. That's their evolution on the landscape for 3 million years. So it's in their DNA to get through dry years. I know that sounds fanciful, but
I was at the previous session where there was a little 5-minute snippet highlighting the one land ownership, and there was some mention of juniper removal in that as well, but I didn't see that really mentioned in interventions here. How is that tying into that water availability? Making the dry years maybe a little less rough.
Question. Yeah, any chance we get to kill a juniper tree, we're on it. So, like, and they're great because they're great to throw in the stream too. They do really good things when you throw them in there. So, what we try to do, and we have funding, say for like a BDA project, is we also want to address other resource concerns. So we do pockets of juniper removal with the idea of using them in the in-stream project. Yeah, it's a great question, but yeah, it's definitely something that we're focused on. Brett?
And her great presentation from all you.
Yes.
Fantastic. Strategic approach
mm,
to reestablishing Thirtymile. I'm also a John Day and Franklin Kool-Aid for the BDA approach and that kind of stuff. A lot of different surveys of and the report, just activity dams, kind of things, but not preparing condition that would support beavers especially. And even in another focus area in the John Day that was only like 50 miles, it was mainly beaver activity. We weren't doing repairing. It's really good to see it move that direction. And then just kind of follow up on that would be statewide. If we can incorporate additional vegetation assessments in these other beaver focus areas and other areas within the district, then the John Day, that kind of stuff would be very beneficial, I think. In planning efforts to reestablish beavers. So maybe additional reach out to some of the other partners is what kind of would help. And this can, I'm sure you will do it, I guarantee it.
I don't wonder if a lot of our beaver guidance has come from the west side, which no offense to the west side, I love the west side, but the forage isn't the main limiting factor on the west side. So I wonder if we just haven't been thinking hard. I mean, BDAs are really sexy and they're awesome. They're a great tool, but we've kind of lost the riparian veg piece, I think. So we're just kind of catching up to it. Yeah.
There are many over the years that I see giant beaver dams.
Mm. They ran out of food, probably.
Restoration.
Thank you.
Anyway, great job.
Thank you.
Yeah, Zach.
I thought the discussion about finding and identifying where your essentially strongholds that are just that Beaver are dispersing from. I thought that portion was really, really intriguing, especially in a context where so much of our work happens within anatomy, within fish presence, and how that seems to imply that if you're trying to get beaver on the landscape, working outside of fish presence, where you have those beaver strongholds already, has a lot of value. Can you talk about how where your beaver strongholds are lining up with anadromite or not, and whether or not those are dispersal areas or sources of population that are like significant for you?
Take that.
Is that true or not? I don't know.
Good answer.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. I mean, yeah, as far as, some of those maps that Reese showed, like on the lower half of 30 Mile, we have a huge partnership with ODF and W with monitoring. And so they've been, Brent, how many years they've been doing red surveys on that? Yeah. Yeah. So,
See if whether because the lack of feel kicked off all the restoration now. That changed so much. There's a lot more spawning happening at riparian. It's the majority of the spawning occurs in the lower 30 mile now. Complete switch.
Yeah.
And along with that, that's when the beaver showed up in the north at
Yeah.
the same time.
so yeah, I mean, 30 Mile is a steelhead factory where there's water. And, that's that's what we're trying to do is just expand those strongholds and they do overlap with our fish habitat presence. So,
What is planned for like the vegetation if you've already like fenced off a lot of the street?
yeah.
Plantings or
Yeah, so plantings, we've been really reliant on crep in the past. And we'll continue to rely on crep. But we are kind of, as far as plantings go, starting to maybe rethink things where we in the past would focus on like 2-year-old trees. We got away from smaller plants, used bigger plants, used cages. That was an adaptive management thing that we did years ago. And now we're even trying to rethink that a little bit more and say like, man, maybe we should just focus on our cuttings on cottonwoods and willows. And then in those situations, we don't need like any heavy equipment, augers and things like that. So our idea is to bring in more volunteers. So we know that those cuttings are easier to plant. We can get more folks, if they're brave enough to go down into 30 Mile, and battle the rattlesnakes, they can. So, I mean, we have a couple different strategies, but we are, throughout this whole process, we're rethinking and trying to see how we can do this better.
I think to add to that, Amber, one thing we're looking at is using BDAs more as a tool to increase vegetation, where before it was, let's just get more water on the landscape. I've always had in the back of my mind, let's use BDAs as a tool to expand those really narrow planting zones that we have, to try to widen that out. But then also from our first BDA project, which we thought was a train wreck, we saw a lot of sediment depositing around failed structures where we didn't have sediment, we just had cobble before. And so I think after seeing that, we can use even failed BDAs as a tool to create new planting areas that we didn't have before. So I think BDAs will be a huge tool moving forward to increase vegetation.
I tried to bring some beaver into the stream that's near our place because the stream runs into a waterfall and it beaver.
Yeah, they can.
And so now I've been into the whole inspected. I give part of fish wildlife, they close the stream on the track. And we had some beaver that came in and then they're gone. And so if I was interested in trying to do this again, where would I find somebody that would be wonderful? Wildlife or kind of person to say that?
Where are you located?
Well, I'm in the very southern part of Clackamas County, 25 miles from west of Salem. At 2,200 foot elevation and, yeah, it's temporary. But there, I know where there have been beaver dams on other streams up there.
I'd call ODFW. There's a gentleman, Conrad Ellie. He is, I think, out of Tillamook. And Tillamook, yeah, Katie says yes. He's out of Tillamook. He's a beaver biologist. And he is all things beaver right now. So he's on the coast, but he's your closest resource probably, and very, very knowledgeable from a restoration standpoint, and also a kind of a mitigation standpoint if you had beaver issues. They can get around waterfalls, not on the waterfall itself, but they'll travel on land. Oh yeah, they'll travel on land and find their way. So I would call Conrad for sure. And I can give you his number. It's Laely. I can give you his phone number if you're interested. Yeah. Yeah. And that's.
Yeah, come find us if you guys have any more questions. But again, thanks a lot for listening.
One beaver slide in
Let's go.
One more question. I didn't want to ask it in front of the whole group because I thought it might be contentious, but like, do you all think about like predator pressure and like how wolves might help like that kind of like trophic cascades affecting the behavior of ungulates and making more forage and stuff like that kind of effect?
Follow stuff and
Yeah. I know it's out of your scope. Yeah.
it's yeah, it's those things. It seems to work. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, for us, like a lot of it's just it just was hammered that. Yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah, it just needs to rest.
Right.
You know, honestly, like kind of in kind of the same thing, like I'm more worried about like with prep and things like that, that we aren't getting enough disturbance, like we aren't getting enough grazing, like are there any ungulates going in there really?
Right. Yeah.
I don't know, everything's still out of whack.
Yeah, no,
right?
that makes sense. Yeah, I'm thinking about that problem first. Yeah. That's interesting. But yeah, I'm just thinking about that because like it's hopeful to me to hear that the attitudes around beavers are changing. I kind of hope that will like extend to more wildlife and kind of like the big picture.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Looks like all of